since you've been on the podcast. I think you might have been one of the first 20 guests that I've had on. Maybe I'm being a little bit generous with that number, maybe the first 10, right?
Oh,
And now I'm
maybe.
all
I
the
don't
way
know.
at, yeah, now I'm all the way at like, over 250 episodes out there, right? Really
Wow.
cranking out the content. But, I really appreciate you wanting to even come back on.
Oh, of course. Pleasure. Like, I do a podcast, so I might as well be on the other side every once in a while.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're on the other side. I'm not quite used to it yet. I don't go on very many other podcasts, but the ones that I do, it's different.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people ask me, like, what podcast do you listen to? I don't. I
Yeah,
don't listen to podcasts. And it's funny because being a podcast host, you would think that I'd listen to more podcasts. I don't have time.
yeah,
So I do mine, but I don't really listen to others. So
yeah. That is, yeah, that's very accurate. And I never understood it until I started doing it. And now it's like, yeah, I don't really listen to podcasts like that. Maybe I'll put on Joe Rogan, right, if I'm doing the dishes or something like that. To keep me a little bit busy. But like listening to other cybersecurity podcasts or just any other podcasts overall, it's a little bit difficult because for us, we're not only doing a podcast, we're doing several other things,
mhm,
which
yeah.
has its own challenges. How do you manage everything that you do, right? Let's maybe cue in the audience to the different roles, the different hats that you're wearing, on a daily basis.
Yeah, I wear about 3 on a daily basis. I have my day job, Chief Product Officer at CyberSync, building out a risk quantification, what we call a cyber risk management platform. So that's my day job. And that's where most of my time is spent. On average, it was funny, I was telling somebody last night, I average like 7 meetings a day, half an hour to hour-long meetings, but I'm doing right about 7 meetings a day. So I'm doing 35 meetings a week for my day job, okay? My second hat is my podcast role hat. So Mondays is my podcast and my recording day. So I have to make sure everything's ready for Monday. I block out an hour and a half every Monday for the podcast. So the podcast is an hour long. I block out 15 minutes before, 15 minutes after. That way we have buffer time, we get the guests in. So an hour and a half every Monday is dedicated to podcasts, and I block out my Friday afternoons right after this time frame. Actually, I block out Friday afternoons to make sure all my podcast prep is done. So my prep takes about an hour to an hour and a half a week. I have to do my prep call with my interview host. I have to prepare all my articles for our leadership communication segment. I do that in about an hour, hour and a half every week. Everything's ready to go, record. My third hat is um, kind of my advisory side, right? I still have the advisory practice. I still advise startups. I still do some angel investment in the startups. And so those kind of come and go. They ebb and flow depending on which clients I have at any given time, what they need. So I've been helping a startup that's doing some really interesting stuff around incident response, investigation work, leveraging AI. So I've been helping them kind of like get their message together, help them understand how to communicate what they're doing out to the different buyer personas. So that's kind of my third hat on a regular basis. And that's before I'm a husband, a father. Yeah,
Yeah, light stuff, right? I mean, you're
yeah.
not too busy of a week, right? It's
No, not at all.
Yeah, I ask because I'm kind of built a similar way. I feel, right. Like I'm real quick to say yes to like new opportunities and taking on more, right? And then managing it I don't want to say it's challenging, but I think the burnout rate will increase as I don't do my own personal things, right? Like if I don't
Right.
go for a walk, if I don't
Yeah.
go work out, if I don't, do my float session, right? Like it's like I'm slowly burning out, right? And so it's a fine balance I'm finding over the over the past couple of years, right? Like any regular listener has heard me talk about burnout every single fall, and
Yeah.
I just get to the point where I'm like, hey guys, I'm literally not recording the next 2 months. I have episodes, they're going out. I'm not doing anything. you
Yeah.
know?
Well, but that's like the husband father side of it, right? So every Monday night and Thursday night on a regular basis, we try to play pickleball, my wife and I,
Mm,
right? So we have a group of us here where we live that we play on a regular. We try to play every Monday and Thursday. So that kind of gets us out of the house, gets us going. Every once in a while, the wife will grab me and go, "Come on, we're going for a walk," right? Like I got to get up because as I said, I sit on 7 meetings a day. I'm constantly at this desk. I actually that's the home machine right there, or the work machine. So, I'm sitting at that desk a lot during the day. So getting up, moving around, getting some exercise so you don't get burned out are definitely important things to have to do.
yeah, yeah, that's very true. It's I recently, and when I say recently, I mean 30 minutes ago, right? I heard this video of kind of re-engaging your brain or changing your why along the way, right? Why you do all of this, right? And I think that that is something that for myself has fallen off a bit, right? My why when I started was let's get a career going that is successful enough to support a family, right?
Right.
Let's have a house, right? Like all those sorts of things. As I'm sure a lot of people, go through that and probably are going through that, right? I mean, that's an admirable goal and whatnot, right? And I found that I accomplished that, but then I never reset, refocused, and so now I'm taking on more things than I probably should because in my mind, in the back of my head, I'm still trying to achieve that goal that was already achieved. Right? Does that make sense?
No,
Did you ever go through something like that?
completely makes sense. Yeah, I mean, the my career path has been interesting, right? Anybody who's followed me knows that every 2 to 3 years I do something different, but I've always had this kind of goal in mind, right? My kids are primarily grown. My youngest is 21. He graduates with his bachelor's from Texas Tech in May. He's got one more year. He's got his master's. He's the last one, right? So I'm at a different stage in life. I'm in my what I assume to be my retirement house that we built down here in Texas. I'm in a golf course community, and I tell people my vision of retirement is I golf in the morning and I do advisory work in the afternoon. I'm not ready to quite do that yet, but that's my goal, right? And so the reason I have the advisory practice, the reason I do the podcast is those are things I love to do and I can do them in retirement. I don't have to work full time if I don't want to. I still do because I there's some things I want to finish, right? But in a few years, like I love just doing the podcast. When I ran Security Weekly, Paul and I were doing 4 podcasts a week each,
Wow.
right? That's all we did, and selling sponsorships and running the company and stuff, but we were doing 4 podcasts a week, and so 1 podcast a week's easy after you've done 4 a week. Like, it's not that hard. Like, once you have your system down, like I said, takes me an hour prep, an hour recording. I spend 2 hours a week. Okay. If I can augment that with some other consulting and advisory work, that's a happy little retirement. And in Texas, if you don't golf in the morning, it's too darn hot in the afternoon to do anything else. So why not sit in the air conditioning and work?
Right. Yeah. It's hmm. uh, you describing that, makes me think about what I'm working on right now. Right. So I've had this consulting business. I mean, I stray away from calling it a business, right? I've had customers here and there. It's not regular or anything like that, right? And it's purely on the side. And I always wanted something where I could go into, a domain, a discipline, get the expertise, from the 9 to 5, from my own research and whatnot, and turn that around into a consulting business to have something extra, right?
Mhm.
Thinking about it from that perspective of even retirement, I don't I don't see myself retiring into the sunset, not doing anything, like what you just described is exactly how I kind of envision my own retirement, right? And I'm much farther off, from than you from it, right? But that's how I view it too. And so now I'm starting to kind of restructure or rework, my consulting with my podcast, with blog posts, with everything else, right? Tying it into a newsletter and whatnot, kind of bringing it all together. I worked with a marketing person, just 1 or 2 sessions, right? And they told me you're doing too many dispersed things, right? You need to tie it all in and have a platform, right? Because right now you got 3, 4, 5 different platforms, right? Let's tie it all in. You're doing good work and it all feeds each other, but it's a different way of thinking, and that's probably the thing that I love about cybersecurity the most overall is that as an individual, I get to learn this stuff, and the stuff that I learn is intangible, right? It's not
Mhm.
like a company could be like, oh, that's my IPO, you can't use that knowledge anywhere else. It's like, well, no, once I know how to secure the cloud, I know how to secure the cloud. Like that's anyone's cloud, right?
Right.
And I can take that and I can build something else off of it, right? Like that really excites me. That gets me going,
Yeah, or
And
to help others actually help them with their startup, right?
yeah.
Because you've built different products, you've seen different things. How do you use that knowledge to help others as they build? Like I said, this company I'm working with, the guys are young. They're young. They're babies. Like they're barely older than my daughter. They might not
Hmm.
even be older than my daughter, right? But what they're doing is really cool, but they haven't been there before. How can I bring my leadership and some of the things I've learned and help them build a better product or how to market that product, right? And so those skill sets have a tremendous amount of value to others who are trying to build their own company from scratch.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because it's like, and I've come to you with different ideas and needed advice before on different things, and it's literally going to someone who's more experienced, who's done it
Mhm.
50 times, right? And I'm doing it once. I'm doing it for my first time. It's like, hey, what are all the pitfalls with this thing, right?
Yeah.
What am I not thinking about? Because you don't know what you don't know until someone tells you or you live through it, right? And in the beginning, you really want to kind of limit those giant issues that occur because it takes up so much time and effort and money and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, Jason Albuquerque, my co host, talks about it a lot. You need to have that network of mentors.
Hmm.
It's not just one mentor, it could be multiple mentors because each mentor has a different skill set that you might need to tap into at any given time. Marketing versus the finance side versus technology or whatever it may be. And it's important for us, and we are a tight knit community. Continue to build out that network and your network of mentors. Who do you go to when you run into a problem, you need help, right? Like I know who my mentorship group is. Like if I run into something, I know who I'm going to pick up and call, and they're going to be there and they're going to be like, hey, here's what I know, here's what I did, hopefully that helps you. And that's why I always try to do the same thing in return, right? Is when people come to me, I always try to help them. I just had a buddy looking for a new role. He's finally wants to get back into the workforce. I took his resume, I sent it to all the recruiters I know. I hope it helps, right? That's what I want to do. I want to help and give back and use my network to help connect other people.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really powerful thing right there that not a lot of people really understand, right? And right from the very beginning, I wanted my name to have some power behind it, right? So when I do make that recommendation, there's no questions beyond what I say, right? Like there's no questions from that person, to me. Oh, well, can they do this? Are they a good fit? How do they work with it? All that stuff. It's like, hey, my initial statement covers it all, right?
Yep.
The initial statement being, my name. I'm referring this person to your role. I know you. I know this person. It'll work out well, right? And so I'm very selective. Even I wouldn't say very selective, but when I refer someone, it's because I know that they can do it, right? I
Right.
know that
Yeah.
they're a good fit for it, and I really try to protect, not necessarily like my brand, security unfiltered or anything like that. I just try to protect my own personal, brand, right? Like when Joe says, it's this, it truly is this. Like I don't have to worry about it,
It's great.
That's something I
Great.
take a lot of pride in.
Yeah.
It's
And you should.
being able to do that, have people trust me like that. But
Yeah, and it takes time to build those relationships, to build that trust, to put you in that position, right?
yeah,
But that's what we should all be doing to better our networks.
yeah, and it pays dividends down the line too. When you need something,
Yep.
now you have that established network, you have that established brand and whatnot, and it's a
And
lot
we all
easier.
needed it. We all need it at some point, Joe. Trust me, we all
Yeah.
do. We all go through the ebbs and the flows, and sometimes we need help in return.
Yeah, it is it's fascinating, right? When I was starting this podcast, I mean, I expected five people to tune in. I mean, maybe, five on a good day, right? Um, but a couple fast forward a couple years, 4 years, which is kind of crazy for me to say because for a while there it was like every year I was reassessing if I was going to keep doing it.
Right, right.
Um, now like I've gotten, job opportunities off of it. I've gotten consulting opportunities from it. When I interview at a company, right, the first thing that I'm typically told is, "Oh, you have a podcast," so that like separates you completely from everyone else, right? Like, not only do you have a podcast, you're developing connections as you're doing it. Like now, like I said, right, I have over 250 episodes going in. That's most of those episodes are different people. Like, I
Yeah,
mean, you've been on twice, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's not. It's not like I'm bringing the same people on all the time. And so now, when I go to companies and they're saying, "Oh, we need an email security solution," I mean, this literally happened right pretty recently. Was one of the directors was saying, "We need an email security solution. This thing isn't working out. Who has any recommendations?" No one else on the call except for me had a recommendation, and it's not because I necessarily like worked with them directly. It's because I know the product because I talked to the people that built it.
right, right.
It's an interesting door, that I never would have expected.
Yep. Great connections, great
Yeah,
knowledge too. I
yeah,
mean, how many vendors have I interviewed in my career? A lot.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. That's probably like thousands at this point, right?
Yeah.
Well, Matt, tell me about CyberSync. Tell me about what your primary focus is right now, because I was looking at it and it looks interesting. I think you guys are approaching risk management overall from a different angle.
Yeah, it's true. It's one of the reasons I came here. So the CyberSync team has been a sponsor on my podcast in the past. So I knew the team, I knew the founder, Patrick O'Reilly, and I kind of always tracked them because they did some really interesting things around automating crosswalks. Then they built some automation capabilities to auto score controls. So I was always intrigued. Some people know that my first startup was in the GRC space. Control Path was one of the early governance, risk management, compliance products out there in the industry. I spent 2.5 years at Archer trying to fix it. So I have a lot of experience in this space. And one of the challenges that the legacy GRC platforms have is they don't have a really good way of handling cyber risk. All the major platforms, Open Pages, Archer, even ServiceNow, they really focused around operational risk.
Hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily translate to cyber risk. And so the joke has always been in the industry, big G, little r, big C. Heavy on heavy on governance, heavy on compliance, but really light on risk. And Richard Syerson is a really, really good friend of mine. He wrote the book of How to Measure Anything Cybersecurity with Doug Hubbard. And one day Richard came to me and said, "We should do a startup together." I said, "Richard, the only startup you and I are going to do is if we can solve the risk management problem once and for all, which has to be some sort of quantified risk capability." Richard went off and did some other stuff. He's now at Qualys as their chief trust risk officer or something like that. Um, and but that stuck with me a little bit in the back of my mind. When I left Cyber Risk Alliance after the Security Weekly acquisition and being on the media side for a couple of years, I got the itch to build something again. So my first kind of foray was to go to Living Security, which was building a human risk management platform, take the the human user side with risk management, really interesting, except for here was the problem. Risk was just a number between 0 and 1,000. What does that mean? Right? Like, if you think about all these risk algorithms that are out there, there's some number between 0 and 10, 0 and 100, 0 and 1,000. Some of them are unbounded. It's meaningless. It's a meaningless metric. And this has been the problem in cyber for a long time is we look at things qualitatively and we multiply random numbers together to come up with a number that really doesn't mean anything. And what do I mean by that? As a CISO, I have to work with my executive team to go justify budgets. If I walk into the CFO, the CEO, or the board and say, we're 79 out of 100 and I need $2 million, what does that mean? 79 to what? What's the 2 million going to do? Move you to an 85? What does that mean? What does 85 out of 100 mean? It's a meaningless metric, okay? However, if you can go to the board and say, I need $2 million because I can reduce $10 million in risk, and I can back that up through risk quant, actual risk quantification, now I'm in a much better position to get the 2 million because I can write down 10 million in risk. So what prompted me to come to CyberSaint was Patty, the founder, Patrick O'Reilly, showed me what he was doing with actual historical loss data. So there is a database of actual cyber loss events that has been around for almost 20 years. Now, if we know anything about insurance and actuarial tables, we also know that that data exists for life insurance and all these other things. And what he figured out, Joe, was how to take the cyber loss database, statistically analyze it, and be able to drive risk quantification off of it. And when I saw it, I was like, dude, this is a game changer because we've been talking about we don't have this data to actually do this, but he found it and he's doing it. Now, Patty is an ex economist. He's a quant on the economic side,
Oh
right?
wow.
So he's a math guy, but he figured out how to apply those same principles that finance and insurance use into the cyberspace. And I'm like, dude, I'm in. Like, I know exactly what we need to build because it's the gap that the old GRCs have. How do you tie risk and compliance together? And whenever you see a risk, a change in your controls, how does it impact your risk? So what I've been building in the last year and a half is basically we call it a cyber risk management platform. It's tying risk data with control data. So out of the historical loss database, we have 18 risk vectors that we can identify actual historical loss against for every industry. And I can use it as a starting point to drive the potential inherent risk of an organization based off of its peers' already sustained losses. Okay. And use that as a way to prioritize which controls based off those risks should I concentrate on to drive down the most risk. And that's kind of what we've built is this very connected risk compliance product. And so why is that important? There's a lot of CRQ vendors, cyber risk quantification vendors, and they're really good at quantifying risk, but they have no idea about controls or compliance or how that ties into risk. They're simply doing risk quantification for the purpose of driving insurance premium policies. Okay, so I do the risk quants once. Don't I do it once, I'm done. Because once I have my policy, I don't need you anymore. Then you have the continuous control automation vendors that are doing continuous control automation. Like, I won't name names, but they're doing it at scale. Great, but they know nothing about risk. Their risk purview is a list of vulnerabilities. Folks, that is not risk. So what we do is we bring those two together in a very unique way. And so what it allows our clients to do is not only quantify risks, we can actually use those risk quantification capabilities to actually justify whether I should or shouldn't remediate certain risks because not only can I quantify the reduction in risk, I can compare that to the cost of the project and I can tell you whether there's a return on security investment or not. That's what I believe CISOs need to have a risk budget conversation with their board and their executive staff. That changes the game because now they can justify spend based off actual reduction in risk dollars. That's what we're
Hmm.
building.
Wow, that is a completely different way of doing all of risk. I mean, the biggest thing for me being in the role that I'm in, right, is basically making the argument for my CISO to go to the board to make that exact, argument, right? And
Yes.
the way that they want it, the way that I always deliver it is exactly, the format that they want it, that they're going to be using. And putting those numbers together it's so difficult. And like you said, right, it's on a scale of 1,000. What in the world does 700 mean to me? It sounds like a C, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, when I hear 700 out of 1,000, sounds like I'm passing. I mean, I don't know how else to relate that. And that's everything that we've been taught, through all of our education, right? Is
Yep.
okay, that sounds like 70%. And it has no context though,
No, it has
right?
none.
It has no industry context. And even even when I try to tie it back and say, hey, look, our competitor over here, they got breached this way and it cost them X amount of dollars, it's still loosely tied back some way, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of need that authoritative source like CyberSaint to go in and actually say, no, like this is the real data.
Yeah.
These are the numbers. So that's very fascinating.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because what really kind of highlighted this for me is when I was at Living Security, one of our clients, a large client, they were trying to figure out how to put our risk score on a slide with the other risk scores. And it was four different scores with four different ranges. And I went, how how can anybody understand this? Like literally, how can anybody understand why this tool's producing a 700, this one's producing a 7, this one's producing 70? Like it just didn't make sense to me, right? And it was like because it's all garbage. It's just it's made up craziness. Like the only thing that really boards, CEOs, and CFOs understand is money. They're all money people. So if I can't figure out how to equate cyber risks in something that they fully understand, I'm never ever as a CISO going to get a full seat at that table. Because if I bring vulnerability counts or incident counts or other things to the board, th- they're going to give you 5 minutes, you're out, and they're going to have the real big boy conversation with everybody else. And that's just reality. And I mean, Jason, Ben, and I talk about this on the podcast all the time, Joe. Is that's why we do a leadership and communication segment on the podcast. We're trying to help educate the next set of CISOs to learn how to be more business focused executives because cyber is a business risk that has to be managed and it has to be managed like any other business risk. It's all about money, guys. And so that's why I went to CyberSafe because I saw such a unique opportunity to do something different that I thought would actually move the needle in the risk conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, you said something that is kind of like it's a mentality switch, right? Because typically, typically when you think about the experience a CISO has, right? They probably have experience as, a technical engineer, right? Like
Yep.
they understand technology. They're the top security person at the organization. They are the go-to person for it, right? They're a leader in the community. They have their different avenues and outlets, like maybe they go on podcasts and whatnot, right? And coming from that background, you're not really geared towards talking to the board in a way that the board understands. You're geared in talking to other technical people in a
Right.
way that they understand, right? And that I've only had one CISO that really kind of drove that home to an extent, right? I mean, like, yeah, I feel like engineers can be a little hard headed at times, right? Because we're so in the weeds, we're so technical. It's hard to break through. But to have that understanding of, hey, the board is looking for this. This is how they view it. They view it as a business. It's a section of our business that they just seem to only throw money into, and nothing comes out of it, right?
Right,
And they're required to do it. And so, me going to the board and saying I need another 2 million, they're going to say, well, why do we have to burn another 2 million on you guys? Right?
right,
You guys have been fined ever since. We
right,
haven't been breached yet. Why do we need to give you more money?
right. And why not take that 2 million and go invest it in some new AI capabilities in this
Right.
product line to grow my revenue? See, that's the battle that CISOs are going up against. They have to justify those dollars. And the justification is, do I spend 2 million on security or do I spend 2 million on AI? That those conversations happen all the time. We've had multiple segments on the podcast that highlight this. I had Sumedh Thakar, the CEO of Qualys, come on because his board asked him, "How much are we spending on cyber? Why don't we just buy a bigger cyber insurance policy to cover those losses?" Like he's a security vendor getting asked these questions from his board. Very interesting interview for anybody who wants to listen to it. I brought Jess Byrne and Jeff Pollard on from Forrester in their Future of the CISO report. Huge kind of eye opening based on the different role, the different CISO types. What kind of skill set do you need? And I just put a clip on LinkedIn the other day. If you as a CISO want a board seat and you haven't run a P&L, you're not going to get a board seat because board seats are reserved for people who understand how to run businesses, right? And they made that very clear. Jeff Pollard does a really good talk on this point, but CISOs who want to be board members also have to learn how to run a business. They need to be a founder. They need to run a company because then they'll have the rest of the skill set that boards are looking for, which is the financial understanding.
Huh. That is that's interesting, that you frame it like that. I never thought about it like that. That really the board is expecting you to run your business line like it's a separate business, under the same entity and whatnot. And all of those people on the board, they're all doing that. You
They're all
think about the
business people.
product, the marketing, the sales, all of those people, they're all treating it like a business.
Yeah,
And security is the only one that's coming into the conversation that's, telling people that they're wrong, right? Making things more difficult. They're
right.
asking for more money
Yep.
without really having the evidence and the proof. So I mean, that product at CyberSync, that's going to be invaluable to really any company in any industry then.
Yes. And because we have a lot of the base data, it helps you quickly benchmark yourself against your peers. We
Huh.
actually give that away for free, by the way. It's funny. We have this thing called this free cyber risk analysis. You can go to the cybersync.io website, sign up. 4 clicks. You put in your primary industry, your secondary industry, if you want to, it's optional, your revenue size, and your employee size. We'll tell you the top 5 risks that your industry has faced, and we'll tell you which controls are mapped to those risks. We give that away for free.
Huh.
So you can see it yourself. Um, it's eye opening sometimes to see what your peers have been susceptible to, how much actual loss they've incurred just on the top 5. That's 5 out of the 18 and which controls they should focus on. We do that as a way to help educate people on what we're doing and how we're doing it. But it's a great starting point for anybody who wants to try to move away from a qualitative kind of risk based approach to a quantitative risk based approach.
Yeah, I mean that's also a fantastic hook, to just comment on the product, right? Because as security people, we're very curious. You give us a little crumb. All right, now we want to see the whole
Yep.
slice of bread, right? We want to see the whole thing. And so like that for me, I mean that would be like an immediate. Okay, well, what else is there? You showed me five.
Right.
What are the other? What are the other
What's the other
13 that
13?
I'm missing?
Yeah.
That's It's interesting. Now I kind of want to go do it right now. after after this podcast, that's what I'm doing.
All right, go ahead. It's free. Sign up.
Yeah,
Now, watch out. My marketing team might come after you after the
right,
fact, but
right.
be
I've
forewarned.
I'm used to marketing at this point. It's yeah, that is fascinating, and I wonder why no one else really even you know thought about doing it like this. What's the
Because a lot
there's
of
a
people don't realize that the data exists, or if they if you look at the data source we're using, if you look at it in the raw, you can't. It's hard to figure out how to use it. And this is where Patty's brain really came into the mix, which is, wait a minute, I have all these values. Let me statistically analyze this data in a way that we can use it effectively. It's kind of simple at the end of the day. Once you do the analysis in the all the analytics, we're basically producing two values: loss event frequency and loss magnitude, or threat event frequency or single loss expectancy in the NIST 830 model, right? It's very simple. Once I have those two numbers, I can either do a straight line ALE like 830, which is uh, threat event frequency times single loss expectancy, or I can take loss event frequency, loss magnitude, drop it into FAIR, run the 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations, and produce the risk curves. It's not rocket science, but the hard part was the data source, the statistical analysis that then drives those quants. And so it's a foundation to the platform. We use it to help kickstart a lot of our clients. But then what I built into the platform was all the customization that clients can do themselves, right? If you have different loss magnitudes, put them in the system. You can build your own risk models. You can create your own heat maps. You want a 6x6, create a 6x6. You want a 4x4, create a 4x4. I don't care. But what we do is we balance the old qualitative heat map with a risk quant on the other side of it. They're right side by side in the platform. It just opens your eyes to, all right, I have all these risks that I think are high, but when you see the bubble, the size of the risk in quantified dollars, you instantly know where to focus. It's so evident. And so all that customizations in the platform. And then with our latest release towards the end of last year, our version 4 release, I opened up beyond cyber risks because we had a lot of clients that were like, we love what you do for cyber risk. Can you add in enterprise or other types of risk in the platform? Absolutely. So we have, so clients can customize their own risk types and categories. They can track other types of risk outside of cyber risk in the platform. And now what we're looking for is, are there similar data sources that we can use to quantify some of those risks?
hmm, wow. Have you ever done like a case study of how accurate the numbers are to like actual breaches? Like if you go back in time, right? And let's say you run Equifax's number,
Right.
right? And would it? I wonder like how accurate it would be compared to the numbers of that breach.
Yeah. So remember, annualized loss expectancy is likelihood times impact. So we have the raw impacts, but we also know the likelihood of that attack, right? So everything in the platform is annualized loss expectancy. Okay. So we know the impact, but in order to keep it consistent, we used ALE as the metric in the platform. So we have that data. I have customers that have run through it. Um, and use it to prioritize the remediation, right? So I had a home builder here in the Dallas area use it to look at their posture compared to their peers. The CEO set their target. They use that to drive down their risk. They're going through remediation right now. We have a large public company out of the Seattle area that the first they got breached. First purchase they made was us to understand their current risk posture. They've used to prioritize all their downstream projects. Now they're enabling automation to automate all those control scores in real time to just continue to drive that real time kind of risk quant data in the platform. Like great use cases.
Hmm. It's probably like a great single pane of glass, not just for the CISO to look at, but maybe even, other executives in the
Yeah.
C-suite, right? Other
Yeah.
board members to say, hey, I want to look at this, 8 a.m. every day. I just want to check it, right? I want to see
Yeah,
it.
see where I am. Let
Yeah,
me look at my inherent risk. Let me look at my residual risk. Let me see how I'm trending. Where are my top risks? Are they trending up and down? So lots of trending graphs in the platform kind of show you trend over time. Is ransomware ticking up or is it ticking down? Right. The beauty of the historical loss database is we get monthly updates, right? So every month we're updating that data. So if you synchronize your risks with our industry data set, you're getting real-time updates to those trends as they're coming into the platform. And so we can show those risk trends over time, which kind of helps you like, is my is the inherent risk for ransomware going up or going down based off the latest breaches? Um, and you can we use a by default we use a 10-year look back period, but you can shorten that down to 3 years. So you can use just the last 3 years of historical loss to kind of fine tune how you want to track those. So lots of fun customization in the platform to support various use cases, but the data is awesome, and that's what hooked me when I saw it.
yeah. Yeah, that's I mean that's what caught my attention right there. When you talked about the data and how you found it, how it wasn't really even being used earlier. Which kind of blows my mind because I've been at companies where they have some solution that's comparing them against their competitors, right? And they get some arbitrary score, that
Right,
doesn't even make sense to me,
right.
right? And they're pitching it to the board and they're wondering why they never get approved, for a solution for the next budget or whatever it might be, right? It's I do you find that now I know that this would be valuable in the federal sector or the government's, side of things. Do you find that a lot of government agencies are coming to you right now and,
No,
finding the value? Yeah, that
not yet. They're
they haven't
so
found it
compliance
yet, but
focused from a CMMC perspective right now. It's just they're not there.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
maturity
very
thing,
true.
right? I mean, the industries that see the value in this obviously are the financials and the insurers who have been doing this for a long time, healthcare, a lot of public companies. And it's not necessarily the Fortune 500. I think our sweet spot is the 3,000 public companies that are not the Fortune
Mm,
500. And the reason is they don't have highly mature security or risk management programs, but yet need to understand materiality and potential impact of cyber risks in the SEC reporting requirements. That's where I think our sweet spot is. And we're starting to see some of that. But I mean, look, we've got Fortune 500 clients using our platform, but I think we also have a really, really good use case for those other 3,000 public companies that need help.
yeah, I mean, you're fitting into a spot where it can help companies of all sizes, right,
Hmm.
across every sector, pretty much, right, and that is extremely valuable, right, because you're really capturing this data in a way that hasn't been conceptualized before,
Correct.
and like I keep on going back to that point, but it's fascinating to me because even like I'm in the space, I'm the one that's preparing the report that the CISO is going to give, and I'm looking at these numbers and I'm saying, well, they're not gonna. No one in that room is gonna understand this. No
Right.
one in that room, right?
Nope.
If I have to explain it to the CISO, right, and break it down, no one over there is gonna understand it. And
Nope.
so that's where that revolutionary piece is coming from. That I keep on going back to it inadvertently.
Yeah. That's the good and the bad, right?
Yeah,
It forces people to think differently. The problem is people are so used to doing the old way and that they can't wrap their heads around some of that too. So I mean, we take the good with the bad.
yeah. Well, that's probably like the government side, the government impression, where you always hear about how like DARPA and the NSA and CIA, all these intelligence agencies, they're decades ahead of what's publicly available and things like that. And that's very true. I've talked to some of those people, and I brought up something like some like homomorphic encryption to a friend of mine who's in the Navy on the cyber intelligence side of it. And he's like, "Yeah, we've been doing that for about 7 years now. So go ahead and catch up," right? And that mentality is completely different when we're talking about the other side of the house, right? The
Yeah.
the not so innovation, keep the lights on house, right? Where they're not interested in doing new things until it's an old thing for everyone else, right?
Right, right.
It's a
Yeah.
totally different mindset, kind of frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, again, we get the good with the bad.
Right. Yeah, well, you know, Matt, we're right at the top of our time here, and I always try to, keep in mind everyone's schedule. Like you said, you're gonna go for a walk or play golf or whatnot. It's a beautiful Friday, I'm sure, over
It's
in
Friday
Texas.
during Lent, so it's time for the fish fry. I gotta get
Oh
ready to
yeah,
go fry fish.
yeah. There you go. Well, Matt, before we end things here, how about you tell my audience where they could find you if they wanted to connect with you, and where they could find Cyber Saint if they wanted to definitely go take advantage of that free offering?
Yeah, well, anybody can find me on LinkedIn, Matthew Alderman. I'm one of the early guys, so I don't have a bunch of crazy numbers behind my name. Um, on X, I'm at Muldermania. Um, cybersaint.io is the website for the company. And the podcast is Business Security Weekly. Go to securityweekly.com/BSW and you'll find all my 380 plus episodes out there.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate you coming back on. It was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Cool. Yeah, thanks for coming on. As always, I really enjoy our conversation.